Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It's your host Sweep Union, and in this one we start out in the direction of Novomykhailivka, where the Russians have managed to capture the majority of the town. There's only a small sliver of land that is still contested, as the Ukrainians continuously launch counterattacks following the Russian arrival at the edge of the town. The Russian advances was confirmed with this geolocated footage showing Russian soldiers 155th Brigade standing near the western edge of the town within the last final parts under the Russian control. With this, the Ukrainians are constantly launching counterattacks in the direction of Novomykhailivka to try and push them out of the western parts and regain a foothold within the town, and the Russians are looking to gain complete control of it and push the Ukrainian presence completely out of the town. Taking advantage of that, the Russians are now pushing in the northern section from the Dacha area towards Paraskoviivka. If the Russians manage to successfully gain a foothold within Paraskoviivka, it would only be a matter of time before the Russians gain control of that as well, where they then could concentrate their forces directly towards Konstantinivka from the south, or move through in the northern direction towards the Dacha area of Konstantinivka, which is separated here by the river line of the Sukhyai River. Konstantinivka is a town here to the north of Volodar, which is the main town here that is connected by roads. If the Russians gain control over Konstantinivka, there would be no roads connected to Volodar that is still under Ukrainian control. This is why Konstantinivka is a very important town for the Ukrainians, and if the Russians simply just reach it, it would be very difficult to send supplies through. That is why the Ukrainians are constantly launching counterattacks towards Novomykhailivka to prevent the Russian capture of it. The Russians have control over the 90% of the town, with only the last 10% being contested. The Ukrainians do not have any foothold within the town, but the Russians do not have full control of it yet. With the fighting reaching Paraskoviivka in the north after a Russian assault following the Ukrainian counterattacks to the south, it is likely that the situation will continue developing towards Konstantinivka without any pause or of the sort. The Ukrainian fortifications are largely connected in the northern part of the town. The fields here to the north have multiple lines of Ukrainian defenses. In the southern parts, there's hardly much. The Ukrainians were largely relying on Novomykhailivka to defend the southern section. This means that the Russians will likely launch armored assaults through the road here towards Konstantinivka, and from the southern parts through the forest lines, launching infantry assault groups to gain a foothold within the forest areas and move through towards Konstantinivka. Konstantinivka itself will be heavily bombarded by the Russian Air Force and artillery as a preparation to the offensive assaults. The Russians will also largely rely on armored assaults in the northern parts. We are still in the muddy season in Ukraine. This means that it is very difficult to constantly launch armored assaults in the fields. The fields are largely left unused as both sides do not want their armored vehicles to get stuck. Ahead of the ground returning to be sturdy again, both sides are saving on their armored vehicles, using less than they had previously used in the winter season. Based on this, it is likely that both sides will launch larger armored assaults or defensive operations during the summer or early summer period as soon as the ground returns to becoming sturdy and is no longer muddy. The Russians are expecting to launch a larger offensive or intensifying their offensive as soon as the ground hardens. And the main reason for that is that they will be able to bypass some of these fortifications. For example, in the direction of Konstantinivka, they could launch assaults to the south without having to worry about the roads. In other sections of the front line, there are also advantages there. We'll get to that later. For now, we move on to the north of Pobieda, where there has been a Russian assault capturing the fortifications here to the north of Pobieda, south of Rehorivka, and this is also located on the high grounds. The road here south of Marinka and connecting in the western direction is all located on the high ground in this section of the front line. The Ukrainians have this long line of fortifications west of Pobieda. It is likely that the Russians will start attacking it both from the northern and southern directions in an attempt to gain control of it, after which there are no significant Ukrainian fortifications before after the town of Maximilianivka here to the west of Rehorivka. This means if the Russians gain control over this fortification to the west of Pobjeda, they can start assaulting RUAF and Novomykhailivka from the south through the road, either to run through the road, drop off infantry that then launch assaults through the forest lines and through towards the villages or towns, or simply by running assault to groups of armored vehicles through and moving through the small scapes of road or through these paved roads that are to the south of Novomykhailivka. So with this, there are multiple options and possibilities for the Russians if they do gain control of these fortifications. The Ukrainian would have no significant presence in this whole area that is just majorly open fields, and towards Kurakhove, which has multiple layers of defensive fortifications and lines, acting as a heavily fortified town. If the Russians do gain control and footholds in the town of RUAF and Novomykhailivka, they would be able to completely cut off Krasnoyarivka from the west. So this may become a priority section of the front line for the Russians to increase the fighting by Krasnoyarivka, heavily pressuring the city by flanking their positions to the west. It was previously predicted by me that the Russians would push through RUAF and go to flank Krasnoyarivka, cutting off the supply by the railroad. However, this has become very difficult due to the weather conditions. To do that, the Russians would need to gain control over both RUAF and Novomykhailivka to use the roads here to get to Hostre, which is this small vacation village, which can then be completely cut off from the supplies of Krasnoyarivka. In the northern direction, there are a few roads that are still last minute for Krasnoyarivka, going through the northern parts of the city and then through this bridge here. But this could also be hit by the Russians to destroy the bridge, which will prevent supplies from going over. Then there's a possibility of the Ukrainians using the roads here to the north to resupply. This is why the Russians will likely push through close to the bubble here the Ukrainians have, which was largely retreated from, push through the northern parts towards the roads here to north of Krasnoyarivka. However, there is no road other than this singular one between Nevelske and Krasnoyarivka. This is why the Russians will likely follow this road through all the way to the north of Krasnoyarivka to cut off the roads here in the northern parts and occupy the northern parts of the city. Moving further north in the direction of the northwest of Avdiivka, there are two advances by the Russians. The first one is in the northern parts of Semenivka. The Russians made a small advance closer to the northern parts, as the Russians are here looking to consolidate their gains in the central parts of Berdishi with the southern parts of Berdishi and the northern parts of Semenivka. All of this to gain control over this western parts of Berdishi before moving up north towards Novomykhailivka and other areas to the north. So with this, we see heavy fighting taking place by Berdishi and Semenivka as the Ukrainians continuously launch counterattacks to hold on to their positions within the villages, and the Russians are looking to gain full control of it. It is, however, a very difficult position for the Ukrainians to hold on to, as there's no supply lines through any of the roads in the area, which makes it very difficult for the Ukrainians to hold on to their positions here, send reinforcements, or simply to resupply their forces already present. This makes it very difficult for the Ukrainians to hold on to their positions, and very likely for the Russians to gain full control of it soon, especially with heavy bombardment hitting the Ukrainian positions, followed by armored and infantry assaults towards those positions. In the northern direction towards Osiritsine, the Russians continuously storm the Ukrainian positions in the southern parts of the village. It is reported that they have gained control over large parts of the southern parts of the village. However, it is not clear exactly how much that they have taken. Fighting takes place by the fortifications and the rail train station in the southern parts of the village. This indicates that the Russians have made a significant progress within the southern parts and have solidified their foothold within the village. Fighting takes place heavily across the front, but based on the information coming to this update, the Russians have made significant progress within Novomykhailivka and are close to capturing Berdishi and Semenivka. However, none of these three villages have been fully captured by the Russians. The Russians have started a new offensive operation north of Pobjeda, which could be looking to undermine the Ukrainian defenses by RUAF and Novomykhailivka. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for additional content, and have a great day.